So this is actually pretty wild. So Pete Buttigieg made this comment during the Democratic debate, and his handler sent it out on Twitter, but then very quickly deleted it. Now, this tweet reads, "We can't afford a scenario where it comes down to Donald Trump with his nostalgia for the social order of the 1950s, and Bernie Sanders with his nostalgia for the revolutionary politics of the 1960s." And so the handler very, very quickly deleted the tweet. I think it was like literal moments after sending the tweet. And he said this comment on the debate stage, but like literally minutes after this tweet was sent, it vanished, it was gone, it was deleted. Because obviously, what were the revolutionary politics of the 1960s? Okay, we're talking about the civil rights movement, talking about gay rights, anti-war movement in Vietnam. All of those things were the revolutionary politics of the 1960s. And so when you literally send out a tweet saying that Donald Trump wants the social order of the 50s, and then Bernie has the nostalgia for the revolutionary politics that overthrew the social order that Donald Trump wanted, you look like an idiot, and then you realize why you're not doing well with black voters. There's literal video of him where these Black Lives Matter folks are basically asking him, like, dude, how can you ask us to vote for you? You fired the first black police chief. And he's like, he literally tells them, I'm not kidding. He says, "I'm not asking for your vote." Verbatim, he says that. Verbatim, "I am not asking for your vote." It was such a loaded answer, I could not believe my ears when I heard it, or my eyes when I saw it. It was so incredibly loaded. And then there's a video of him. You guys remember Eric Garner, right? The horrifying incident of police brutality in which Eric Garner was choked to death by police officers in a chokehold after nonstop saying, "I can't breathe." They murdered this man in cold blood on the street. And so there was a team, I think it was the Notre Dame women's team. They were wearing these shirts that said, there's basically a tribute to Eric Garner by saying "I can't breathe" on it. And then his police force, they wore shirts saying like, "Follow the law, breathe easy," which is such a disgusting shirt. And then there's literal video footage of Pete Buttigieg defending his cops wearing those. And then you wonder why black folks don't support your campaign. And then you start faking endorsements from black representatives. And then you start faking partnerships with black businesses. You fake an endorsement with comedian Keegan-Michael Key, and all this stuff. And then you use a photo of a Kenyan mother and son. And then you wonder why they don't support you. Then you make a comment like, you make a comment condemning Bernie Sanders for his nostalgia for the revolutionary politics of the 60s, which gave us the civil rights movement. Now, what you also have to understand is all of that stuff is intertwined. All of that, like, revolutionary politics of the 60s, all that stuff is intertwined together. Anti-war, civil rights, just in general, poor, rights type of thing, right? Enhancing the lives of poor people. All of that stuff was kind of all part of the same sort of guild, And so Martin Luther King Jr., he wasn't just a dude who advocated for civil rights. The guy called himself a democratic socialist. He became very unpopular, and he was already very unpopular at the time. But the guy started protesting against the Vietnam War, and he was doing his poor people's campaign, and that he became really unpopular, like severely unpopular. And he talked about how, there's a quote of him where he basically says, "We all need to realize that the evils of militarism and poverty and capitalism and racism, they're all in one." And so all of those revolutionary politics of the 60s, it's all of that combined. And so if you're talking about, some of the interpretation that people are trying to be charitable of him is, oh, he's talking about the Castro movement. The problem with the Castro thing is Fidel Castro, one thing about Fidel Castro that people don't like to talk about, the dude genuinely loved black people, all right? So basically he had issued a bunch of anti-discrimination laws and did his best to basically bring those together. Obviously he had his literacy programs, but in Cuba, while Fulgencio Batista was basically the dictator there who was murdering people left and right, there were basically slave plantations, and basically the black people in Cuba didn't know how to read, and so they were just essentially these slaves to these plantations. And what Castro did was he had these literacy programs to teach them how to read, to teach everyone how to read, and so obviously disproportionately affected those black Cubans who were slaves, because they were the ones who didn't know how to read in the most numbers because they were slaves. And so no matter how you want to cut this, and also Fidel Castro then went on to be one of the biggest, if not like the biggest, I think maybe even the only one, unless my memory serves me correctly, of like a world leader who's supporting Nelson Mandela from the jump. But he's a huge supporter of Nelson Mandela and ending South African apartheid. Like all of that stuff was like all intertwined, right? So even if you're trying to do the charitable thing of, oh, he was talking about Castro, dude, Castro, like a big revolutionary politics part of his was ending racism, literally just straight out ending racism. So you are, no matter how you slice this or dice this, it's really, really incredibly insensitive. And this is what happens when you're a white guy, like Pete Buttigieg, right? You become very out of touch, and you just sound stupid when you say stuff like this. Let's not have nostalgia for the revolutionary politics of the Civil Rights Movement and the Voting Rights Act and all this stuff. And it's like, God damn, you're a loser.